Hi, how are you today? I am Carmen Wimberly Coffin, and this is Race Matters Learn More Part 3. We have been talking for the last couple of days about race matters, about why my black life matters, and why it should matter to you. Race is the foundation or the undergirding of what has happened in this country in terms of um, race, in terms of economics, in terms of how every system that we live under today in America was built. And today we're going to focus on health care, economics, and wealth building. So, in terms of health care, um, first of all, a lot of the healers that were used during slavery were slaves who had come over, who had been brought over, and they would use herbs and things that they would create or things that they had learned in the motherland to heal and to help those who were in need of healing. Um, and there were doctors, and they were white doctors. There weren't very many black doctors, obviously, but there were some. Most of that was in the north. So, healthcare was a natural, holistic type of thing. After slavery ended, there were there were black medical schools that were created, um, and there were a lot of medical schools in the country. There was a commissioned report by Andrew Carnegie in the 1800s, and because he didn't like the fact that so many of the medical schools were for profit and there was no regulation about how they were done. And so the man who he commissioned to write the report was not a medical person, he was an educator. And his report suggested that most of those schools needed to be closed and there needed to be some form of regulation for health care and how doctors were trained. At that point, there were several black doctors' schools, medical schools. The amount of money that was suggested in the report that needed to be in the labs and all those things that needed to be at these schools caused many schools, black and white, to close, caused many of the larger white medical schools to merge with one another so that they would not have to spend so much money to come up to this report. The American Medical Association adopted the report, and so that is why we have the kind of medicine that we have in America today. In that process, by 1917, all of the black medical schools closed except for Meharry and Howard medical schools. The largest medical school at the time was in Raleigh, North Carolina at Shaw University. And they graduated medical doctors, pharmacists, dentists. That school closed as of 1917. Um, from 1917 until the 1960s, there was not another medical school, black medical school, opened until there was one opened in Los Angeles. So you can see at this point that in order to have adequate health care for the black community, uh, there had to be someone who was black to practice that medicine. Um, and the reason I say that is because, as part of the report, it was written that it was assumed that Negroes would take care of Negroes. Well, if Negroes were not able to go to medical school, could not afford it, um, were not allowed into the white medical schools, how could they take care of each other? So health care was pushed to the back burner for most black people. Um, there are um, there are certainly areas where there were more black doctors, but they were far and few between. So I did a conversation probably about 4 or 5 conversations on healthcare in the black community right after COVID hit, because I got a question from a friend about why was Dr. Fauci seeing disparities in the black healthcare in black Americans. And so that is one reason why. And one of the books that I referenced quite a bit is called Black Men in a White Coat by Dr. Damon Tweedy, who is a Durham doctor. But it talks about his experiences in medical school and his experiences as he was training. There, and I will try to put links out there for you if you would like to go back and see those conversations, because I think I did 3 or 4 of them. The other thing I wanted to talk about, so the other piece of that is, if you aren't able to get medical care, then you're not going to take care of health issues the same way that people who have access to medical care can get them. And one of the things that is problematic there, especially for elders, when the Social Security Act was created during the Depression, part of the compromise in order to get it passed was that the Southern legislators or Congress people did not want to allow Social Security to be given to those who were black. And so rather than just say we don't want, African Americans or black people or Negroes at the time are not allowed to collect Social Security or to pay in the system, the rule that was added in was that domestics and farm workers were not allowed to participate in the Social Security program. And so most black people, black women, were domestics, and it was still a very rural society at the time, although we did have some large cities. So a lot of black people worked or owned farms. And so they weren't able to put that money in. So when it came time to retire, they didn't have any money to draw out like white people did. So that's another layer of systemic racism in the economic world that has kept people from being able to have the foundation that white people have had. There have been complaints, or I've had complaints from other people, from white people, that I was privileged. My family, even my mother's side of the family, my grandfather was a farmer. He and my grandmother was stay at home. She had 8 children. So she sewed and she took in and she did that kind of work. But they were not eligible for Social Security. So when they were elders and could not work anymore, my aunts and uncles had to help support them because they were too old to farm. And my grandfather truck farmed in Wayne County in North Carolina, and he would drive his produce to Raleigh, which is about an hour and 15-minute drive daily, to sell his produce. So when he was too old to do that, he still had bills to pay. Your house might be paid for, but you still have a light bill and water bill and all of that type of thing. So you can see how that would have affected people's ability to gain wealth. And Social Security was also kind of tied to the Medicare. So as elders get older now that they are able to collect Social Security, they are able to get health care. So if you go your whole life and you can't afford health care and you hit 65, suddenly you can get decent medical coverage through the Medicare program. So there have been studies that have shown that for the next 7 years, between the ages of 65 and 72, black Americans who were not eligible or were not able to pay for private health care insurance, their health outcomes become better during that period of time because they are suddenly able to afford health care and can begin to take care of themselves better because there is someone there to help them. So the other thing we want to talk about today is economics and wealth building. And there are several different areas to talk about there. But what I just talked about is Social Security. So that has helped our elders as they have gotten older to be able to afford to do things a little better than they were when they did not have any assistance. Another program that the government had was the FHA loans. When FHA loans were originally created, um, they were the FHA could write exclusions, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday. The FHA would write exclusions into how they were willing to create loans. Loans were available for certain people, but not for others, and it might not it would be in the covenants or in the exclusion. Negroes could not receive FHA loans. Housing projects in the suburbs, and if you have not heard of Levittown, Levitttown in New Jersey, was a huge development created about 500 homes, I believe, after the war, and veterans were able to come home. Middle class workers were able to get FHA loans, but not if they were black. And there were some black people who were able to purchase homes, and they were denied, or they were treated so poorly that they left. Um, in America, the main way that most people are able to accrue wealth or to build a financial legacy that they can pass on to their children is through having the asset of owning a home. And people buy a home once they show that credit worthiness and they are able to buy a house, then they are able to build, they are able to grow other things because they're growing the assets in the equity of their home. And they can pass that home down to their children when they die. They can get loans off of that. It shows that you're credit worthy if you are able to pay a mortgage every month. Um, and it helps you to accrue savings, uh, and it just helps you to build your wealth. So that's the main way in America people are able to build wealth. So if you are not eligible, if you were held off from being eligible for getting this a loan, and the only difference in you and other people who were getting loans was the color of your skin, then for so many years, 30 or 40 years, that that would put you behind in building wealth. That is not to say that some black people did not build wealth, but that was not the majority of black people. Um, that was majority of white people were able to get loans and were able to build wealth for their families at least one generation out. So there are specific differences that speak to that. And yesterday we talked about the book The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. His book talks about redlining. It talks about how segregating the neighborhoods helped to create these divisions so that people in white neighborhoods were able to purchase homes and build wealth, and how these things are built into the law. Um, Another book that I want to share with you that helped me to understand a lot of things that I did not understand is called The Wheat Money by Crystal Tyler. I'm having a hard time figuring this part out, showing the books. This book is Crystal Tyler's family history in Oklahoma. It's the history. She's white, her husband is black, and it's a history of both of their families from the 1800s, from 1865, the year that the slaves were freed, and it goes through 2005, and it talks about how each family was able to either make it or not make it, in every area of life. And there's some real truths here, and there's some things that make you think, because you don't think about those things. You don't necessarily think about them if you're black. You definitely don't have to think about them if you're white, because it's just part of your norm. So this is an excellent book. as well. One of the other things I want to talk about is how capital was created in America, how businesses grew their wealth. So, if you look, Harvard University has apologized for how it was built, how it was grown, because it was built by blacks, by slaves, and so no, they didn't have to pay. All they had to do was get the land. They didn't have to pay for the labor that it took to build the school. And so consider this. Consider you're a homeowner, uh, and you have all kinds of staff at your house. You have somebody to wash your clothes, you have somebody to cook your food, you have somebody to take care of your children, you have someone to do your gardening, you have someone, you're a farmer, you have somebody who works in your field, and you don't have to pay them. But whatever profit you get coming in, you get to keep that. You keep all the money. You don't pay the people who work for you. Who builds wealth? You build wealth. The people who work for you are not building wealth. You might allow them to eat the scraps that are left, from what they fix for your meal. So whatever's left over, they can have to eat. So you consider you fed them, and you may have a shanty, a falling apart house, or a falling apart room built for them to live in, so they don't have to pay any rent. But it's not the same kind of place you want to stay. But they have to take care of their family. You might impregnate. If you're a man, you may have impregnated, raped the women, and you have other children, but you don't take care of them either. And so that is what slavery did. Slavery allowed people who were in charge to grow their wealth, and the people who worked for them, that they owned, that they considered part of their wealth. Uh, so when you go back and you look at the census records will show or wills will show who your property was, what your property was. And generally, if you had slaves, they were listed under your furniture, under your animals. They were not considered to be equal to those things. But they had a value. There would be a value, a money value, placed on the heads of those people. And it didn't matter what age they were. It didn't matter if they were related to each other. There was a value placed on them. If so, that was how white people built wealth. That was how they built their, I don't want to say empires, but in some cases it was empires. And black people didn't have that opportunity. And once slavery ended, when black people who worked on farms, who were slaves on farms, considered the community of Raleigh, the Camerons owned the largest plantation east of the Mississippi River. Cameron Village is named for them. The slaves' property, the property that they were able to get, was what is now called Oberlin Village today. It's where I live. But this community was built from the slave owners' original property. So once the slaves were freed, if they had property and they were still farming for the previous slave owner, they were sharecropping. The sharecroppers might own the property. There would be a house probably on the property, but the seeds, the implements they had to use to farm the land, were purchased at the store that the former slave owner owned. They priced how they wanted to. They would run an account for you. And at the end of the season, when you were selling your harvest, then they determined what the price was for the harvest. And then after you got the money for the harvest, or you were told what the money, because you didn't see the money in your hand, when you were told what the money amount was that you would receive from the harvest, um, then they would tell you what your bill was and take the money out of what supposedly you had profited. When that happened, you might be getting some money and you might not. Or if you got some, it was such a little amount that what you couldn't do a lot with it. So, still, to me, that's still a form of slavery because somebody else is determining everything that happens to you and to how you get your money and how you are able to take care of your family. Uh, so, that was another way of wealth building. Banks were not necessarily taking black people's money, so you had to keep your money at home, whatever money you were able to get. So, a lot of businesses were created that way, and some businesses have acknowledged that, and some have not. So, here are a couple of other books, or here's another book I want to share with you. The Color of Wealth. This talks about the racial wealth divide. Um, a lot of people still say, well, why don't you just go to work and, save your money? If you are already starting 50 to 100 to 200 to 400 years behind, how do you really expect people to catch up? That's not an easy thing to do. It wouldn't be easy to do if you were white, and it's certainly not easy to do if you're black. Another thing, for those of you who know me, you know I like to cook, and so one of the book authors that I follow, her name is Toni Tipton Martin, but she explained something that I had never considered. But a lot of times, recipe books were created by white women. Consider that the white women didn't cook. They didn't do the cooking. They had someone in their kitchen who, they had a maid, they had a cook, uh, and so the recipes that they would put out or that they would share would not necessarily be their recipes because they weren't doing the cooking. So there are volumes of cookbooks. There are people who were chefs who were black, but they couldn't profit off of what they did because the people that they worked for profited instead. One of her books is called The Jemima Code, and she explains a lot about cookbooks, restaurants, and how economics played a part in those endeavors as well. Um, I'm not going to continue much longer today, but these are just things I want to share with you. I will put the names of the books in the comments, or I'll list the names of the books and their authors. If you are interested in learning more, if you are interested in having your company to learn more, please contact me at Race Matters for Me, RACEMATTERS, the number 4, ME, at gmail.com. I would be happy to come and share. We can talk about how that needs to be done. And tomorrow we will talk about justice and public safety, as well as politics and policy. So tune in again tomorrow at 1, and we will talk some more. Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Bye-bye.